Hello, my fellow exhausted law enthusiasts. We are back for the recap of the Karen Reed retrial, day 30. We are really close. We have Dr. Laposata talking. I'm just doing a recap. I'm not a professional or anything. For transparency's sake, I will link everything below. So you have Dr. Laposata, who is the forensic pathologist who was hired by the defense. She is a former Rhode Island medical examiner. And we had so much insanity that went down in court. The last 2 days of court had been very start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. There have been so many motions and things that needed to be ruled on, which I thought had already been sorted out before, particularly with Dr. Russell. But the court kept changing her mind. Oh, she can talk about this. Oh, she can't talk about it now. Oh, she can get into that. She can't get into it now. There was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of aggression. And Dr. Laposata is the cutest little thing. She's very direct, and has this good balance of, she doesn't take a lot of nonsense, but she is also a teacher, and she's an instructor, and she's just really good. The people who are teachers and who are instructors of things are much better than people who just do the things at explaining things to those of us who don't understand. So she was able to explain things very well. She was very easy to follow, and she was talking about the injuries. Now, what's hilarious is how much, without intending to, or maybe she was intending to counter Welcher. There's a lot of what's happening. Just hold on. So yeah, there we are. More arguments about slides. And then we might, unfortunately for all of us, have Dr. Welcher come back to rebut Dr. Rentschler. I swear, with this case, in the Commonwealth case, we have John O'Keefe, we have Trooper Connor Keefe, we have O'Hara, and over here we got Rentschler, Welcher. I'll see you all in the next one. Well, but you resigned shortly after being criticized. She goes, didn't resign. So Dr. Laposata was asked about just a lot of the injury things, and she was like, yeah, the brain, when he hit his head, that was the absolute main cause of his death. Because once the brain is hit in a certain way by the brainstem, it collapses on itself and it swells to a point where it is not usable. And that is where the concussion would happen immediately. No purposeful actions could be done. And that is when that individual passed away. But she noted that the marks to John O'Keefe's arms happened while he was alive. Because of how she was specifically asked, well, can you tell if cuts, marks, lacerations, and abrasions happened before or after death on a body? Yes, because of how the blood vessels look and because of the coloring that is present. And if it is red and white, then, or pink, then it is going to be, that happened while blood was still readily flowing through the body, while oxygen was still moving through the body, making those wounds happen while the person was still alive. Any injuries or cuts, lacerations, or things that happen after death, they are brown, yellow, and they don't have any, there isn't flowing blood, so the blood isn't spread through the skin. So if you've ever had a really deep cut and you can kind of see the sides of your flesh that have all those fresh blood things going, that's not what's present in non-living body cuts. And she said, so that, yeah, I've seen it a lot. She worked in a hospital, she worked in the ER, and she saw thousands and thousands of injuries and bodies. And Brennan tried to go after her credentials. She had been let go shortly after some pretty historically significant, like the big fire that had happened at the nightclub. And he had pointed out something called the Patino case, and another case that he had pointed out where there were bodies left unattended. She didn't go to bodies at the nightclub, and that she was let go after being not recommended by the people who are in charge of the medical examiner's office, the mayor and such and such. And she was asked about that, and she said, no, I was not fired. I did resign because there were talks of political budget cuts. And she said, it was so cute. She was like it was like she's trying to not say it, and it was like, but she's like the nonsense. And he said resign after being criticized. Like, Brennan was trying with her, and she was, and it's just this funny thing seeing this short, cute little medical examiner going, come at me, bro. Brennan was getting nowhere with her. She goes, the commissioner and all of these and the mayor, they wanted to do a bunch of budget cuts. There was a lot of political stuff going on, and they wanted me to cut a medical examiner for expenses. And if we would have done that, then we could not have done as well of a job as needed to do to be respectful to the bodies. So I couldn't deal with that. I was not going to sacrifice good quality work for money. So she stepped down. And then when she was asked about the nightclub thing, she goes, when there comes to big incidents on the scene, she goes, I don't usually go to the scene myself. That's not common for medical examiners at all. She goes, I sent my investigator, someone representing the office was there, who does get sent to the scene, was at the scene. And had I ever been, and she goes, there are call lists, I have all these things, I was already involved in the court case surrounding this. I have the call logs and the evidence. No one ever called and requested me to go there that night. I knew there was going to be an unfortunate influx of deceased coming into the office, so I was at the office preparing all of that stuff, making sure that we had enough equipment, that we had enough everything that we needed for the incoming deceased. There were an unfortunate number of people who had expired, and our office needed to prepare for that. And she goes, so the investigator was sent doing the investigator on scene work. I was doing my job in the office. And she goes, there was nothing unattended. There was nothing unsigned or unreported. She said, what does happen is anyone who is somehow connected to incidents like this, like for instance in gang shootouts or anything like that, people who are main priority tend to get done first. And so we did have, there's only so much you can do with so much time, and there's so many people at once. And she goes, and so there is a lower priority for people who do not have family members or who are left unidentified. I can't begin an autopsy for someone who has not yet been identified. So we wait for that person to receive some kind of identification to a certain point, and we take care of the main people who may be needed for court related things, etc. She said, so all the reports were done, everything was signed, but there is a priority list, and that happens in any job. And when he tried to make another argument, there was an objection, and she had this little smirk on her face where she was like, where he tried to say something and Jackson made an objection, and she started getting her water. She's like, yeah, that's right. You've been objected to. And then she'd also brought up X-rays. Now, if you don't remember from day 22 or 23, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll try to find the photo of it, and I'll make sure to put which day it was from. But it was either 22 or 23 with Dr. Welcher, where he had said that to his knowledge and understanding, there were no X-rays done at the medical examiner's office when he was asked about injuries to the hand and how there were no broken bones. You know, even going 24 miles an hour, getting even sideswiped, Jackson had pointed out, or Alessi had pointed out, why were there no broken bones? And he goes, there could have been hairline fractures or other small breaks, but there were no X-rays to be able to determine that. So we don't know. Well, then lo and behold, Dr. Laposata comes out and says, I reviewed the X-rays from Dr. Scortabello, who was the medical examiner in this case, in case you forgot. She goes, yeah, I looked at those, and they go, are X-rays always taken at in the medical examiner's office and autopsies? And she goes, yes, it's a standard practice. And he goes, and you know how to read and understand X-rays, because, oh my gosh, the way Judge Cannone threw a constant fit about whether this thousands and thousands of body autopsy forensic pathologist medical examiner worked in hospitals doctor was qualified, and that he had to lay foundation for every little thing he asked, he being Jackson, was frustrating. But she was like, yeah, when you become a doctor, that's a general medical thing. She goes, there are people who are specifically made and trained to look for special things in X-rays, but being able to read a general X-ray and examine X-rays is a part of a general medical practitioner's thing. That's basic entry stuff for anyone who's in medical. And so then there were X-rays brought in, and we're looking at X-rays, and there were no fractures, no hairline fractures, no minor fractures. There were 0 breaks in John O'Keefe's hand. There were breaks to John O'Keefe's ribs, but those had happened because of the fancy automatic CPR machine that was used at the hospital. And Dr. Laposata also attributed a lot of what could have been hypothermia injuries to the torso, to the abdominal region, to the automatic CPR machine. And that is because it's very big and it covers your whole area here. Where it's presses down all the way to the sternum area, and all of the organs that are normally protected from your ribs, that's what the ribs are. They're literally a protective cage. They're getting crushed into those organs. So the head of the pancreas, the top of the stomach lining, depending on how big the stomach is, the lungs, the liver, all of those things are getting pressed and punctured very intensely. It takes a lot of force to try to mimic, replicate, or bring back a heartbeat. So having a machine physically do that, it's pressing into the back of the spine, which causes severe injuries, bloating, breaks of appendages. And it's like, well, is that better or worse than manual CPR? The advantage to the machine is that it helps prevent EMT fatigue, because there does become a point, you've never given CPR, or if you've never taken a CPR class and have had to do the testing thing, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of force. It's a lot of energy. And you are specifically trained. I'm trained in first aid and CPR. This is about my 6th or 7th time being trained in it, being certified in it. When you're trained in it, there is a thing where it's like here's where you need to stop before you think you need to stop. And there is a like new updated training where they're like if you have to stop to take a breath, that's where you need to stop giving compressions, because that means you are running out. If you can't try to breathe and keep up with the pressing of the compressions, then you are going to wear yourself out. And having being in a traumatic situation, having all of that force exertion, you could pass out yourself. And so instead of having one victim, you got two. And if there's one thing that first aid and CPR will teach anyone, from the basic people like myself to anyone who's up in the medical field, if it's causing you excess fatigue where you can become a second casualty, don't do it. To the back of the skull, his bones in his legs, his arms, and the rest of him, and his neck were not broken. That's the point of all of that. Laposata also went into, I mentioned hypothermia before, and he brought it now. She goes, no, there weren't any signs of hypothermia. Well, hypothermia was listed on the medical examiner's death certificate, and she goes, yes, because he was found in a cold environment and he was found covered in snow. He was outside in freezing weather. You cover your bases as a medical examiner, and that's why it was put underneath as a possibility, an accessory to death, not the cause of death. The cause of death was the bash to the head that caused a severe concussion leading to death. And it was like, can the body get cold if it's inside? Jackson asked. Now, the Judge Canone has been very strict about not letting things come in about what happened inside the house of 34 Fairview, mostly because Brennan didn't bring in people except Jen McCabe, who were in the house on 34 Fairview, only people who were in the house and also outside of the house during the alleged time of the incident. So Jen McCabe was there the morning of, and then Sarah Levinson was at the party the night of the 28th into the 29th of 2022, but she had come outside to talk to other people, and Julie Nagel was there to be talked to when his brother came to pick her up, etc. So those people had gone in and out. Brian Higgins was not called, and just Brian Albert was not called, Nicole Albert, Colin Albert, Allison McCabe. A whole slew of people were not called back. And so we really were avoiding, Brennan was very much trying to avoid that there was anything to do with John O'Keefe going into the house. It has been hinted at, but it has been admonished if it goes too far. So instead of going, if she goes, yes, if somebody's in a cold environment, if it's cold and it's inside, just inside doesn't necessarily mean warm. And she goes, if it's cold, the body will cool down. And she goes, when a body passes away, it will start to naturally cool down. If the environment's cold, the body's going to get cold. That doesn't mean hypothermia. And she goes, hypothermia is a specific kind of cold reaction to the body. There was no frostbite, and there was no chill mark. So you know how if you've ever been out in the cold and the wind whips your cheeks and you have that redness, not frostbite, but like frost burn, those severe redness or chapping of hands where it gets all red and cracked from the cold. None of those things were present on John O'Keefe. His hands were not chapped and cracked. His face was not chapped and cracked. He didn't have any severe damages to his nose itself or his ears. Things that you would expect to find pretty quickly in a hypothermic situation. His lungs and all of that stuff, except for the compression from the machine, didn't show hypothermia or hypothermic injuries. John O'Keefe did not die from hypothermia, and I had asked that early on. If you've been watching me for a while, I had asked about, like, the medical examiner put down hypothermia, but in Jackson's opening statement, he was like, you'll find that there was no hypothermia. And I'm like, it's on the medical examiner's thing. What do you mean there's no hypothermia? The man was found in cold. Well, now we know. Just because you're in the cold doesn't mean your body dies from cold. That doesn't mean that hypothermia occurred. And it turns out that the medical examiner, according to Dr. Laposata, who was also a medical examiner, she goes, you cover your bases and you put things down. You know, you don't want to have arguments. And so there we go. And Brennan tried, but he didn't. Also with Dr. Laposata, she has asked about if she had considered speed or acceleration of the vehicle in her consideration. And she said, by Brennan, she said, no. That's not what happened. He wasn't hit by a car. His injuries were in no way consistent with that, so it doesn't even be consistent because it doesn't matter. If that's not what happened, then that consideration is irrelevant. Takes away from the rest of my work. He didn't get very far with this witness. In fact, he made this witness more likable. Normally on cross-examination, when you point things out, you're to show the jury how flawed they are. You're supposed to make them look worse. You're supposed to make them look less credible, less trustworthy. But with Dr. Laposata, I think people left going, oh, she's more honorable. She's more noble. She's more credible. And she also didn't say anything about SUVs being launched into space. I'm sorry, that really got to me. It really did. And then we ended with Dr. Laposata, and then we went into the final witness for the defense case. There are still some rebuttal witnesses from the prosecution, but the defense has their last witness, Dr. Rentschler. Not Dr. Welcher, not Dr. Wrench, not Dr. Ranch, Dr. Rentschler, which is spelled like rent and then Schler, Rentschler. He is the second biomechanist engineer from ARCA, and he is going to explain more about the injuries. And we didn't get far with his testimony. He was asked about what ARCA was hired to do, how they were hired initially, and he went into a lot more about the first trial. Listen, in the defense case in chief, what we have is the direct words of the FBI came in and the first trial came in. So the jury, the court tried to not let the feds be entered into the courtroom. They tried to not let the jury know that this is a retrial. They know. They fully know now. They may have suspected before, they fully know now, but Dr. Rentschler was just full on like, yeah, when we were hired in the first trial, but it's like, okay. And he talked about the work they did. He talked about their reports and what they were doing, and he made it very clear. I didn't know anything about the case. I didn't know who anyone here is, or whatever. He goes, I was hired to try to replicate injuries to this person, John O'Keefe. And that was the information I had, and we were told that he was allegedly, possibly hit by a Lexus SUV, and we were to try to replicate his injuries. And what he really went into before they had to cut him off and argue about his slides and presentations, because Brennan practically was like, we don't want his presentation at all. Because remember, ARCA's bad for the Commonwealth because Brennan has been trying constantly to keep them out. And now he's like, I don't want slides 10 through 23 in. I don't want these text in. For these, like, I think it was 5 to 7 slides, we need some of the text removed. Your expert changed his thing 2 days before he was going to go on the stand. And now you're saying that this fully presented, ready to go thing needs to be changed because it's going to make you look bad? Sir? But it didn't matter because once again, from not only people from the defense, but also other witnesses from the Commonwealth's case, that when they tried to replicate the injuries from the Lexus to John O'Keefe, Dr. Rentschler said it never happened. It was impossible for us to replicate any scenario, no matter what we did, to get the injury to the back of the head that was severe enough to cause a concussion to lead to death, or to cause a skull fracture to that magnitude, and not break anything else in the body. And he goes, and that's what we were told, that we were given his injuries and we were to replicate those injuries happening with the Lexus SUV. And he goes, it just never was consistent. There just wasn't a way to get hit by the SUV and not sustain multiple breaks outside of the head. It just could not happen. We heard that from Scorbello. We've heard that from Dr. Russell. We heard that from other EMTs. We've heard that from the other forensic examiner from the Massachusetts Police Department. We've heard all of these people say it's not consistent with being hit by a car. His injuries are not consistent with being hit by a car. His injuries are not consistent with being hit by a car. I'm thinking that this man was not hit by a car.